Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm James, continuing on with my build of this Aeromite RC plane. If you're interested in building this plane, this is not a boxed kit. You'll have to build it off a set of plans like I'm showing up here hanging on the wall. In the introduction video for this build series, I go over a few different ways on how you can obtain a set of plans. So in this video, I'm going to be moving on to installing the landing gear. In a previous video, I actually formed the main landing gear wires and I did the construction of the mounts for the landing gear. I'll put the number of that video on the screen here if you're interested, go check that out. But now I'm going to go ahead and get these just get connected. In addition to that, I'm going to be installing the tail bracket or the tail wheel bracket here. This is just a Debro. It says 40 size, which seems like a kind of a big tail wheel, but if you look at it, actually it's not that big. It'll fit fine and work fine for this plane. Okay, let's go ahead and flip this over. And there's our slot and our landing gear mounting area, again, which I did in the previous video. So let's go ahead and put our landing gear in, our main landing gear, I should say. Go there like that. This one will go on here, like so. Now, in order to secure them, I have a couple of these plastic or nylon, I don't know what they're made out of, little straps. Oops, just dropped one, hold on. These little guys are right here. Now these are some old ones that I had laying in a junk box that I have. I don't know what brand they are, but you can find these. They're just little, obviously pretty simple little plastic straps. You could probably make your own little straps like this out of even aluminum or even some other type of plastic. Just drill it out, kind of cut a little rectangle like that. Should be no big deal. In any case, so these are going to go on like this, obviously. And then I have some little wood screws that we'll use to mount it. So I'm not going to make any measurements. I'm just going to go ahead and put one on the sort of on the outside edge of the wire that actually plugs into the fuselage. And I'm going to go ahead and mark a hole here. This one and this one here, like so. And then I'm going to drill these out because this is actually pretty thin in here. I don't want to split the wood. I'm going to get my pin vise and we'll drill the hole out a little bit. And then I'll screw it in and then I'll take it back out. I'll use some thin CA to strengthen that and then I'll put it back in. Boy, I forgot that I used some hard wood in there for that mount, so I don't think I need to put CA on this. I think this is going to be strong enough as is. And I do want to make this obviously so that I can actually get it off because, you know, it's going to bend over time. Your wire landing gear, you know, will bend over time. You'll have to take it back off and reshape it. So you want to make that easy enough for yourself, but you also want to make sure that it's nice and strong when it's connected. Boy, well, I'm going to have to draw this one back out because it really got stiff in there and it started, I guess these screw must be a little bit cheap because it's kind of stripping on top of there. Shouldn't do that for something like this. Oh well, let me get another screw. It's always something. That's better. Okay, let me go do this other side and we'll come back and take a look at it. Okay, so these are now mounted and I think it looks pretty good, nice and strong, and I can take it off as I mentioned if I need to. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the tail gear. All right, for my tail wheel itself, this is just a little foam tail wheel I had again in a spare box, and it's just foam, and I think it's about 1 inch, maybe a little bit less than 1 inch diameter. I think that'll be a nice size for this. Maybe it's a little too big, but I think it's going to be okay. And then, of course, again, here's our Dubro wheel bracket kit. Let's go ahead and pull it apart here, take a look and see what's inside. Let's go ahead and carefully, I'm going to go ahead and get a little tray for this. Hold on. So again, here's our wheel. I'll set that aside. Here are the parts in the bag. Now this particular one, it calls for actually soldering the little washers. They give you 3 little washers, and here's the actual bracket, obviously. And what's going to happen is the wire is going to go through here like this. They give you a collar, sort of like as a retainer, that you put on like that. And then what they say to do, they give you 3 little washers, and you got 1 little washer here that's supposed to go up against here, and that's going to sort of hold it. And what they're saying is to solder it, and then you put another washer. There's 2 other washers, and you put a washer over in here, and then the wheel, and then a washer on the outside. And they're saying to solder it on. I'm going to see if I can look in my spare parts box and find a couple more collars. I'd rather just do this with some simple collars instead of soldering. So let me see what I have, and I'll be right back. Okay, well, thank goodness I was able to find a couple little collars that will fit. And if you don't have them, of course, you can purchase some. They're not that expensive. So now I don't have to mess around with soldering. And plus, if I have to, I can take the wheel off and do things like that. So I'll use these extra collars instead of the washers. So the first thing I want to do is put the first retainer on, which is going to be above the wheel. And the reason you want these retainers on here is you don't want the wire to sort of jam up into the bottom of the bracket and get kind of bound up on there. You want to have a nice sort of, like a smooth contact. So the way to do that is to put the collar, or as they say, to put the little washer and solder it on, which I'm not going to do, as I mentioned. So this guy will go on here first. I don't have to screw it in just yet tight. We'll just go ahead and get it kind of assembled. Yeah, there's that one. And then we have another one which is going to go on top of that one. This one you really don't need, honestly, because the weight, if you think about it, this is the bottom of the plane, right? And the weight pushing down on the wheel is pushing down. It's never really pushing up, so it's not, you don't really need a retainer on the top, but we'll put it on anyhow. It's not going to hurt. Get this one back in here. That's my opinion. Do what you think you need to do. Let me get this guy in here. Okay. And then for this, I'm just going to go ahead and just going to guess a little bit. I'm going to put a little bit of a bend in it here. And I'm just going to guess kind of where I'm going to do that at. In fact, I can take this out and bend it. Hold on. Just going to put a little bit of a bend in it. Something like that, about a 45-degree angle or so. That. And this one on top of there. There we go. Like that. And then what we'll have to do is just bend this wire, and I'll show you how we're going to get that mounted on to the plane itself. Okay, so the way this is going to work is the bracket is going to screw down onto the back of the tail section like this. But then this wire here, I'm going to have to bend it out to be parallel with the bottom of the rudder. And then what's going to happen, the way I'm going to do it, is I like to use the inner tubing from like one of your control rods. This is a Sullivan, I think, control rods. Comes from one of their sets. It's a spare piece. It's the inner rod. You can use something like, all it is basically a tube, right? Plastic tube. And I'm going to cut a little piece of that, and we're going to mount it on the rudder like this. Okay. And then when this is bent, this will then slide into that like that. And then when this bent, obviously when the rudder moves, it'll be free to move, but it will carry the tail wheel wire with it, and that's how it will turn, right? And then also keep in mind that the wire, basically the axis of the wire, needs to be parallel with the axis of the hinge line so it doesn't get bound up. So it's going to have to be somewhere like right about there. That's where it's going to have to be mounted. So now I'm just going to do a little bit at a time, and I'm just going to try to bend this wire to get it to match. I'm just going to be careful. I don't want it to curve. If I can bend it without it curving, that would be great. And it seems like that's going to be a little difficult, but we'll do our best. I get my pliers out. Okay, so I had to get my sort of needle nose vice grips. Grab some of these. If you don't have them, they're kind of useful, right? So I need to really hang on to that little collar right there and hold it very, very strongly so it doesn't slip. And now I just need to go ahead and bend this. I think I can do it just with my fingers. Just be careful here. If I can just bend it, it is moving on me. Boy, oh boy. Something like that. I think I got to go further than that. Hold on a second. So we're getting there. Let me go ahead and try it again. Let me set it up again. Okay, something like that. Okay, well, I had to spend a little bit of time just kind of tweaking this thing, and I didn't need to spend a much of the video time doing that, showing you, but you got the picture. I think it's going to go just like this. Yeah, it's probably a little bit on the bigger side, but I think it's going to be fine, and I'm not going to go buy another one. This will work. This wheel, you know, the wheel's the same size as they have back here, so it's about the same size wheel. So just a little bit bigger bracket than you need, but it'll work. It'll be okay, I think. I'm okay with this. All right, so now the next step is going to be to take our piece of tubing, and I'm just going to cut out, basically I'm going to cut out a little slot, if you will, or just basically trim this down here on the rudder. And I'm going to cut a little piece that this will slide over. There goes my wheel. This will go over here like this. So then when it moves, obviously that's what it's doing. So really, I got my piece is about that long. So I just need a little piece, probably about 1 inch or so. Get on there, little buddy. So I need about 1 inch or so on there. Okay. And let me just go ahead and mark that here. Again, I want that axis to be right where the hinge line is, somewhere like right about there. There. And I don't want to go all the way to the hinge line, maybe somewhere about here, like that right there. Then we'll do this guy. That. And now I'll just go ahead and carefully cut out a little notch for this. And then I'm going to glue it probably with some epoxy, like 5-minute epoxy. And then I'm going to then cover that. And once it's glued on there, I'll just go back and I'll cover it with our monocoat or a white covering material. And you won't hardly even see it. May have to straighten that up a little bit. It'll be something like that. Oops. Let's cut a little bit more so I have room for the wire itself. Okay. The one thing I will say about tail wheels, tail gear, is that seems to me one of the biggest things that's sort of a pain in the neck when you're out flying in the field. You know, you get your landing gear a little bit out of alignment when it gets tweaked and stuff. And if your tail gear, at least for me, if your tail gear is one of these things that's not very strong, then I spend a lot of time monkeying around with it when I'm out in the field. And I'd rather not do that. So I don't mind it being a little more beefy than it needs to be, but in any case. Okay, so that's going to be just like this. And then what I'll do, like I said, I will now come back and we'll go ahead and glue this on with our epoxy, and we'll just cover this with our white monocoat. And then just to help a little bit with the bond and with the kind of keeping a little bit stronger, I'm going to put a little bit of a groove in here. It's not going to be much, may not do too much, but see if I can get a little bit of a groove down the middle of this, kind of so that this can kind of sit in there a little bit. And then once again, my go-to 5-minute epoxy is this JB Weld stuff. I'm just going to mix a little dab of that, and we'll get this guy glued on. You know, I probably could have done this with some thick CA, probably would have been just as good. But I like epoxy for some stuff like this. A little bit in there. Now we'll let that set and come back to it. All right, well now the glue has cured. We can do a little test run with our tail wheel bracket. Stick that dude right there like that. That's how it's going to go. Nice and strong. And of course we can move it now like this. So the next step is just going to do a little bit of cleanup on this. Have a little piece of monocoat, and I'm going to go ahead and just iron it over and cut it to fit, just to kind of cover up this little plastic tube we have. And that'll be it for the finish on the rudder. And then we'll go ahead and screw the bracket on and attach the wheel. Now that we have that little step finished, we can go ahead and set our bracket, which again is going to be right along the center of the hinges. You want the center line of the hinges and the center line of the tail wheel wire to be aligned so you don't get any binding. So I'll give it a little test run and make sure it's good. Kind of line it up. Take a look at it from a distance. I think it looks pretty good. Again, I'll line it up one more time. Now I'll mark my holes. One there. One there. And now we can screw it on. And as with the other mounting bracket I did, I want to go ahead and drill this out a little bit with a little bit smaller of a pilot drill, just so that I don't get, especially back here in this really very thin little kind of apex here of the tail section, I don't want to split that. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this out with my pin vise. That was pretty good there. think I'm gonna have to put some CA on these ones because this is a thin piece of wood. What I should have done in hindsight is I should have put a thicker piece of wood back inside here for this, at least this outer screw, because this is just that thin sheeting. So I will have to check that, but I'm going to go ahead and just mount this as is. This one in the back here is actually going to be good because it's right into the wood, but this one's kind of thin, so I think I may have to take this off later and just put some CA in there and maybe even put a little plate below it or something, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, like that. Now for the wheel. So that there. And of course I have the collar. Okay, well, there we have it. We have the tail gear, tail bracket assembled and installed, and of course the main landing gear are now installed and rolls pretty nicely. Have a little bit of a click because I think that that wheel back there is a little bit bigger than the axle, so it's sort of like when it goes around it sort of clicks a little bit. That's not a big deal. It'll sort of wear itself out, I guess. But yeah, it works nicely. And man, you know what? The little Aeromite is starting to look like the little plane that could. Okay folks, so the next step in this build is going to install the control rods and the control horns. Then the control horns for the rudder and the elevator. Remember, the ailerons are already finished. We don't have to worry about those. For the control rods, I'm just going to be using a set of Sullivan control rods. These are their goldenrod brand or the goldenrod name. This is an unopened set. It's about 4 feet long. It's way too long. I have some shorter lengths that I'm going to be able to use in my scraps and such. So, and plus the hardware for that. So that'll be in the next video. So until then, thanks for watching my channel. I always appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.